You are king. Yeah. I love it. King of the class. Man, take your crown, king.
You are now listening to the smooth sounds of the Black Cop Podcast. It's like, no, man, this is C-Dub, and you are now here with the Black Cop Podcast. It's just me today holding it down. And today we're going to talk about responding to a traffic stop. That wonderful song was by the legendary Erykah Badu. It's called Didn't You Know? Purchased off your favorite DSP. And in that song, she talks about which way she's talking about a lost sense of direction. And she's almost giving guidance to herself in that song, or to the person that she's talking to in that song. And that's kind of what I hope to do today. Because unfortunately, we as a community, as the Black community, and as a Blue community, struggle to have that every traffic stop ends up in a tragedy. But unfortunately, we have one too many tragedies, particularly a disproportionate amount of tragedies towards the Black community, between the Black community and the Blue community. And I am hoping that this can give you guys a sense of direction. And so now let me just put in my disclaimer. This is not like a end all be all, my way or the highway, a comprehensive, cumulative, process. This is just honestly what I have done when I have been pulled over on a traffic stop, based upon what I know about policing and what I felt like I should do in that moment to survive, and to hopefully have it be advantageous towards my position and where I'm at with it. So like, hopefully, y'all take something from this. Hopefully this is beneficial. Hopefully my voice sounds clear. I got this mic. My mic sounds nice. Check one. And so let's just jump right into this thing. So, really quickly, the traffic stop. Step one, how I handle myself on the traffic stop. Now, I know this is easier said than done. But traffic stops most of the time are going to happen at an inconvenient time. Do your best to be courteous. Being polite. I know that you might not always get that from the officer. You might not always experience that, but a lot of traffic stops, especially in the more modern, larger police departments these days, they're recorded. And if you're going to improve your argument, if something never goes wrong, if something never, bad happens, you want to at least show that you were the reasonable, courteous citizen who was disrupted by this overbearing police officer. And by the way, police officers are instructed to be courteous to the citizens, to be nice until you can't be nice, and then be nice again, which is just an old school way of saying, like, be courteous, but also take care of business. But look, so here we go. If a cop is behind you, first of all, like say you're driving down the road or you're driving down the interstate and a cop is behind you and you're kind of like not sure what's going to happen, the best thing you can do is just to switch lanes. If you can, if it's like a multiple lane roadway and going in one direction, just to switch lanes and get out the way. Oftentimes I've seen citizens kind of get nervous and just keep driving. Like they don't want to make a sudden move. They don't want to do anything they think is suspicious. But the thing is that the longer they stay in front of that cop car, and the longer that cop car is behind them, there's this nervousness, this anxiousness, and at least switching lanes would at least one. It'll alleviate the nervousness from the perspective of, what's going to happen. Either that cop car is going to drive past you because it's like a crowded roadway or something. They're just trying to get going. Or they're going to pull you over. In that case, they're probably going to switch lanes with you, or they're just not going to pass you because they're probably, doing something like calling it out on the radio and preparing for the traffic stop. So with that being said, make sure that you give yourself a chance to kind of limit the nervousness that comes from the traffic stop. And I've seen plenty of times where citizens kind of were just driving in place, hoping that nothing happened, hoping they weren't seen, but it only, only made them uncomfortable. And then finally when an officer goes around them, they're relieved. It's like, hey, You could have ended that from the very jump. And I'm not putting all the pressure on the citizen, but the citizen is the one that's mostly uncomfortable in that moment with not knowing what's going on. And so that's what I do. I just switch lanes. If you're going to pull me over, you're going to follow me over here. If not, I'm glad I got out the way and got that over with. So look, when you're looking for a traffic stop, you want to look for a vehicle that has, of course, lights. Most departments have all blue lights. Some departments have blue and red lights. But you want to see a marked patrol vehicle if it's, with the reflective lights and the reflecting stickers and the police signs. And some of them are undercover cars, but they also have lights on them. You want to see a patrol officer with a badge and his name badge and his uniform. And even if it's a detective, sometimes they have their Ray vest on, which is just a vest that has a badge on the front and says police on the back and has all their equipment on their radio and their, taser and all that stuff on the upper part of their uniform on the protective vest. So at least that way they look the part, that way you are not concerned. If an officer approaches you without any uniform on, it is their job to make sure they properly identify themselves so that you know who they're talking to and so they can, take care of what they need to take care of. And doing that, there have been times where people have been pulled over and lo and behold, or they allow themselves to be put over for a traffic stop and they realize that it wasn't even a cop in the first place. There are people who impersonate police officers. There are people who try to, I don't know, like they didn't get hired. They have these dreams or they like govern the roadway. They try to handle traffic laws. Just make sure that, that the right person is pulling you over. Also, attempt to locate a safe place to park. Ideally, you want to move into like a public area with plenty of light, maybe with people around. So that way there is more of an accountability and to that. You also want to, so of course, a lot of people that I met or know in the Black community, and I wouldn't have known this if I wasn't a police officer. There's a difference between like a vehicle pursuit and like just kind of temporarily failing to yield. Oftentimes like people get nervous and they pull over right where they're at. Also, I've seen it, but if someone wants to say it's like dark outside and it's midnight or whatever, and you got pulled over and you're not in the country where it's like, everywhere you're going to pull over is going to be dark and low light. If you're like in the middle of a block and you see like a shopping center up the block and you want to pull, some people I've seen people, especially people in the white community, will cut on their hazard lights. I know it's a difference, but I'm just going to put this information out there because it's something I've done and, you decide what you want to do at your own risk, but it's a safer way. If you're in a vehicle pursuit, that means you're breaking the law to get away from police officers. When you're kind of temporarily failing to yield, that pretty much means that you're still stopping at red lights. You're still using your signals. You're still driving the speed limit. And it seems like you're just waiting. You're just taking a while to stop for the traffic stop. In that way, in that sense, I've seen citizens like point, like with their fingers saying they want to go over this parking lot, or I've seen, citizens like cut on their hazard lights or whatever. And to indicate that they are in a sense cooperating to try to communicate that they're just trying to get to a safe place. But that helps everybody because even officers feel safer, when it's in a public place and it's well lit because the traffic stop in and of itself is a dangerous police objective, a dangerous police task to take on because you just don't know what somebody has in their car. And so that is what leads to a lot of the precautions and a lot of the case law that allows officers to do what they do. So, now that you make sure that it's an actual car, now that you pull into a safe place, a lot of times you'll see a police officer may slowly approach the car. Some of them will, have their hands kind of just above their duty belt. Some of them have their hands near on their gun. Sometimes it's a bad habit. Sometimes they might have seen something. Just try to keep your calm and keep your hands on the wheel. I don't, you can ask about it. So the time to, let me just throw this out here. The time to investigate on your end and figure out what's going on is not in that moment. Right. So an officer comes to the car, you see he's got his badge and his guns and he's ready to approach your car. He or she's ready to approach your car. And one of the things I've done and I do whenever I get pulled over is, and yes, I'm a cop and I still get pulled over. So it just happens. Yeah. But anyway, so like if whenever you get pulled over, if you are someone, if it's not like, inclement, and if it's not too hot, too cold or something, or you don't have your kids in the back, and you have like heavy tint in your car, I've seen people like, before like while you're going to pull over, not when you're stopped and the cop is approaching, but while you're pulled over, I've seen people like just start rolling down their windows. A lot of times that happens. Cops are going to look up and wonder if somebody's going to try to throw something out their window or not. But ultimately what it does, and what it's done for me when I pull people over and when I've been pulled over, is it kind of eliminates the mysteriousness of the traffic stop. I now can see in your backseat. I now know that there's no one back there. There's no weapons back there. There's nothing back there that I can visually see that is a threat to me in that moment. And so it kind of makes it so that the concern from safety is reduced in that moment. And now you have the chance to kind of like have more of a discussion with the person in the car about the traffic violation, and the person in the car can kind of, well, I can say that part in a second, but you can have more of a discussion in the car about with that person instead of being so concerned about the safety of that moment. So, you parked your car, you put down your tinted windows in your own effort to try to make sure that everybody feels safe as well, because the traffic stop is an inherently dangerous thing. That's something that I would do. I would also, take out my camera phone. Oh, of course, put your car in park. Please don't forget to put your car in park. Some people were asked you to cut your car off. I just throw it out there that I was never that guy, because like I said, if it's inclement, then it's uncomfortable unless you were like DUI or something like that, or intoxicated, because then it's like, well, if you drive off, you can hurt somebody. But other than that, just put your car in park. And so, of course, like you can start recording with your phone. I would record it, just put it in a cup holder or something, just let it record, do its thing. Because any documentation is fun. I've seen people go on Facebook Live on my traffic stops. I've seen people do Instagram Live. That's fine, because hopefully, because generally speaking, that officer or me or that sheriff deputy, we're recording on our Exxon camera. We're also documenting that moment as well. And so there's always, the camera works both ways. So, you know what I mean? So, but everyone wants their own documentation. I can't blame them for it. Make sure you have your camera on and running. Make sure you have your hands in sight. And then so I stopped calling out what steps I'm just rolling through this list now. But also, try to stay organized prior to. So the traffic stop can be a very nerve-wracking experience for some people. Some people get nervous. Some people get angry. All the emotion, whatever it is, whatever emotion it is, it can have less negative impact on that moment when people are organized. So keep your license in your wallet. Know where your license is. If you can get your license out while you're pulling over, that's easier for some people because they don't have to worry about reaching for it while the officer's at their window. Some people, I've seen people keep their insurance information and their registration information in a Ziploc bag that's in their armrest or something. So they're not fiddling through a bunch of paperwork in their glove box or in their armrest to try to find the information, because they're already nervous or uncomfortable at least, and they don't, they're already struggling to find it. Just keeping it in that spot makes it just, you being organized makes you feel at least that much more comfortable. And then so the officer's probably going to get to your car window and they're probably going to say I'm Sheriff Deputy C-Dub and out of the, Washington, D.C. Sheriff's Office or I'll say the Palo Alto Sheriff's Office. And I pulled you over for running a red light or something. Can I have your license, registration, and your insurance information? That is the time to just give them the information, right? So just understand that in that moment, some officers, when you give them that information, that's not the best time to argue what light or when did it happen, if it happened. That is honestly the time just to give them. I'm not an attorney, but most attorneys are going to tell you just to keep your mouth shut and don't say anything. But in that moment, just keep your mouth shut and just pass them. Not keep your mouth shut, I don't mean like that, but just pass that person, pass that officer or that deputy your information. Sometimes that officer or deputy has already made up their mind. They're going to write you a summons. sometimes they're so convinced of what you did, they don't even ask you questions about it. Just go back to your car, go back to their car and start doing research. Sometimes they want to talk to you about it. Now, you know, the safer side is to say nothing, but some officers are different. You know, like I say, officers are like your mid, like you go to a restaurant and having an officer is like having a waiter, right? Sometimes you get really good service from a waiter. Sometimes you don't get good service from a waiter. And justice and like the justice that you get is kind of like the meal. Sometimes you get a good waiter and a bad meal. Sometimes you get a bad waiter and a good meal. You know what I mean? But the restaurant is the restaurant. Like that's the department. You got to get served there. So like when you talk to a police officer at your office, some officers may say, you know, since that person acknowledged this traffic violation and they have a good record, I might just give them a warning or something like that. Some officers may say, since they acknowledge this violation, I'm going to use this information they gave me during this traffic stop in court against them. So you kind of got to pick and choose what you're going to do. And unfortunately for the person in that car, we just don't know how that officer operates. So a lot of people are better off just saying, sir, they're cooperative. That's I do not wish to talk about the traffic violation that you're alleging that I've committed, and just keep it moving. Most officers who aren't like on some egotistical craziness, which I'll get to later, they'll just hear that and say, okay, either they're gonna write them or they're not, and they're gonna go back to the car and do what they got to do. So say they go back to the car, and when they come back from the car, it's going to be two things. Either it's going to be like a warning and get your information back, drive safe, have a good day, whatever, or it's going to be a summons. Look, in a lot of states, if a summons is just a summons, it's not saying it's not admission of guilt or anything. And if you don't sign the summons, which all the signing it means is that you're promised to come to court. If you don't sign it, you create another conflict that wouldn't make a difference on whether or not you get convicted or get a guilty or not guilty in court. All it's saying is that you're going to come to court. But a lot of times there are times where citizens don't want to sign it and they end up getting arrested or actually having to get their car towed. And then they get down to the magistrate's office and they end up, getting a magistrate summons. But now you had to get like actually pin in cuffs, pin in the back of the car and get your car towed in the process. It's really not worth it. Just sign the summons. Now, if there's an opportunity for someone to follow up in the future, like if sometimes there's like an opportunity for an officer to talk to a citizen, hey, say your license is suspended, and you didn't realize it because it was an insurance information issue, right? A lot of times officers can say, like, okay, well, look, I'll give you a warning, you get a fix, and get it taken care of. It'll be documented. But if myself or someone else pulls you over again in the future, and we notate that we gave that warning back in 4 months ago, and all of a sudden now this issue remains the same, then you're probably going to get it taken care of. You're going to get someone to come to court because of already having that warning, and this is kind of be like a follow-up traffic stop by that officer or another person, because we can pull you over again. So the reality of it is that, like, as crazy as it sounds, the criminal justice process is mostly paperwork. It's mostly paperwork, and people will resist getting arrested. People will run from the police. People will get a vehicle pursuit from the police just to avoid the arrest. But then come to court and and take a plea deal. Come to court and just like don't even fight it. Don't even take the defense to trial. Like, I just tell guys, like, look, man, you got this backwards. Like, this whole arrest piece, like, don't fight that part. Like, that's the part that doesn't change whether or not you resist it or argue against it or not. The part that changes is how you handle yourself doing in front of the judge, in front of court. All this paperwork is to get you in front of a courtroom. So don't be that person that runs from the police, or if anything, you want to be the person that turns yourself in. If you're hopefully, God forbid, you're in that situation, but if you are, you want to be that person that turns yourself in, that starts off with accountable, responsible citizen who has an attorney, who has someone that can legally vouch for them, advocate for them in court, and be the person who says, I'm not going to like wrestle with this cop for this arrest or for this summons, or get on a vehicle. So like that part, it just does it always blew my mind. Like, hey, if you're willing to fight that hard to not get arrested, then fight it in court. You know what I mean? But anyway, I don't want to belabor that point too long. So look, so the officer takes your info, takes your summonses. Either they'll come back and give you a break, or they'll come back and give you a summonses. Then it's a good day, right? But so now let me just give you some scenarios that I've seen, and I've seen people come across. Say you run into a situation where like the officer doesn't like that you don't want to talk about the traffic violation, right? And you feel like this officer is becoming really testy. Certain things I'm going to personally look for. I'm going to look for whether this person's camera is running, is their radio on. I'm going to ask for the supervisor to be en route, or I'm going to ask for, I'm going to call a non-emergency number for that local sheriff department or police department and request the supervisor that way. So that way there is someone else who can think and process that moment with that deputy, with that officer. So that way, it's kind of like they call it a OODA loop. And pretty much you want to get out of that. Sometimes you get stuck. You kind of get this tunnel vision, and you want to throw in a ripple, throw a rock in the water, create a ripple effect that gets that person out of that tunnel space. And that's something that can help. Like, can you call a supervisor? I have a question. I really have a question. I'm really concerned about where this direction of this traffic stop is going. Now, granted, you're not always going to have the nicest person, especially when you ask for the supervisor, but if 9 times out of 10, they should comply with that, because that is most departments require an officer to reply to something like that. But I think that is a way of kind of like adding an extra element to the traffic stop and trying to make it safer and more accountable. There are even times where I've asked as a citizen, like, what can I do to make you feel secure in this traffic stop? And I know it sounds crazy. Like, why do we have to do that? Why do we have to ask that question? But and while I'm in that traffic stop, I don't care why I got to ask that question. At that point, I care that I make sure that I am safe. And if anybody else in this car is safe as possible, we'll leave that situation. And if it's just a paperwork exchange, fine, we'll argue it later. There are times when a police officer, so just to break this down too, I want to let everybody know, like, so when you do a traffic, so there's 3 different levels. I talked about this before in an earlier podcast, but I'll just kind of re-say it now because it applies. There are 3 different levels of investigative, I want to say, of means of initiating an investigation, right? You have what they call your mere suspicion, your reasonable suspicion, and your probable cause. Mere suspicion is just like, you just got a gut feeling. You don't have a reason to detain or grab, or hold anyone up. You can try to make consensual contact. That's when you like ask permission to speak to somebody, ask permission to search their car, ask permission to search their person, and their yes requires, they are required to say yes to consent to it. Excuse me. And also, then you have your reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion is pretty much when you have this, like you have this little bit of evidence here and there to indicate that a crime may have occurred. Like if I go into a rough neighborhood and I see someone who I've known has been caught selling drugs before, and they see me and I look, they have like something protruding out of their pants, like maybe like a firearm, and they got something in their hand and they just take off running. That is enough to have reasonable suspicion. That is called reasonable suspicion. It's a totality of the circumstances. And that's not enough for me to book them and take them to jail, but that's enough for me to detain them and continue an investigation. That's what a traffic stop is. A traffic stop is a reasonable suspicion. Now I don't want to, I hope this legal jargon doesn't like get too much on people, but I want people to understand there's a difference between having a reasonable suspicion and then being able to detain somebody and having probable cause and being able to arrest somebody. The difference between detaining somebody and arresting somebody is actually being able to transport them somewhere and take them somewhere, because now you're taking them into custody or removing them from an environment like a jail or a magistrate, what have you, or an interview or interrogation room or something like that. So when you're investigating detention, a police officer can ask you to step outside of your vehicle. A police officer can talk to the passengers. A police officer can request the ID of the passengers in the car. And so when you are in this traffic stop and or someone's in this traffic stop and they have a police officer there, and they maybe they go back to their car and they're checking their license and registration information on the computer and whatnot. It is allowable in most states right now for a canine to do a sniff on the outside of the vehicle because the vehicle is detained. And the people and because the vehicle is detained and there are people inside the vehicle, the people are also detained. So the canine can walk around the car, but here's the thing. A lot of people freak out when a canine comes out. If a canine scratches your car, yes, please make a complaint. Let them fix your paint. But like in that moment, there's honestly, because of case law, and that's state law, but because of case law, you don't have many legal options other than obstructing an investigation in that moment. The canine finds most of the time if they're off, and this is mostly applies to like a department or a state where marijuana is still illegal, and a canine is either going to sniff for like Schedule 1 or 2 drugs, marijuana, cocaine, heroin, like oxycodone and all that. So like when this canine sniffs, if the canine hints at finding something, then that's now it becomes probable cause, and they have reason to remove people from the car and to investigate and search the car. It would be the same thing as if they got the odor of marijuana from the car, or if they found the visually observed marijuana in the car. That would be the same process. And so like, just know that in that situation, that moment, yes, I mean, you can still call for a supervisor and request have this person talk to them, and have this supervisor talk to you and kind of go over with you the process, what's going on. But it doesn't mean it's going to stop it from happening. In that moment, as a good attorney would tell you, the best thing you can do is just be quiet and just not say anything. And if they're wrong, a good attorney is going to find out they're wrong. And if but it helps the attorney because you didn't convict yourself. They had to convict you. But in that moment, the reason why I bring it up, because I think I know people, and I know I would too, freak out if all of a sudden they say, I want to bring canine out, because it's like, I don't trust this dog. What if this dog actually hints on something? And I know I ain't no drug dealer. Like, what if they try to find, then they're going to accuse me of selling drug? Like, so it's like all these concerns of like injustice and unfair treatment, and the fact that somebody's going to like all of a sudden think they're going to find some type of weapon or some type of issue with what I'm doing. And the whole time I'm innocent per se. And so the last thing an innocent person wants to be is accused of being guilty. But just know that is just a standard, a sign of the summons. Now, there are a lot of departments that are getting away from canines. Because of marijuana laws are changing. There are a lot of departments that are requiring their officers to have more of a targeted use of the canine, not just to be sniffing, just to be sniffing. There is case law as well. So when I say targeted use, I mean like this person has a history, or they just came from a place known to sell drugs, or just have someone in the car who's known to sell drugs, stuff like that. Or the case law also states that, like, a traffic stop, if an officer typically does a traffic stop for like 10 minutes, and now it takes him 30 minutes to do a traffic stop because he's waiting for this canine to come sniff the car, I believe it's the Supreme Court has ruled that was unconstitutional. It was an unreasonable detention of a traffic stop. So what that means pretty much is that requesting a supervisor is not a bad thing. Getting understanding, because some officers, one thing officers don't do well is explain the process of what they're doing. And some officers don't trust people. Some officers don't feel like they have to tell people that. And some officers are afraid they're going to mess up their case if they do. But I've never found an issue with like telling people, hey, this is why I'm doing this. So, you know what I mean? Because if anything, what I found is that when I explain to people my investigative process and like why I'm doing something, all they're really doing is accounting for the evidence that I'm collecting that is building a case against them, which more likely says to them, okay, I actually am guilty. They actually did find something. Maybe I should plead for a better deal. So instead of me trying to keep all the answers to myself and then hoping that I can use those answers against them when I get to court. Because everything that traffic stop, everything about that is all for court preparation, for testimony and evidence collection. So try not to freak out. Like I said, if an officer is glitching and it seems like something's wrong, the officer can't relax. Try to, say, hey, can I, can I talk to somebody else? Can I get a supervisor? Because I'm not understanding and I feel like we're not communicating appropriately. If not, I can just call a non-emergency number, ask for somebody to come out, and they'll probably, say, no, I'll just call them on radio. But that's sometimes what you need to do. And last but not least, I throw this in there. And too many people, I think, like, if you're calling just to like, get somebody in trouble, honestly, just to speak plainly, then yeah, I mean, it's just, you're losing credibility. You're going to, take away the department's focus on urgent matters. But there are, and also the camera works both ways. So like if you call and say this officer did this and their camera shows that like actually the surveillance video shows that didn't happen, it's just going to have police departments looking at that person and having a history of that person making false reports. However, if that officer has done something questionable, if that officer has, done something that made you feel like should not happen, too many people do not rely on formal complaints. And doing a formal complaint nowadays is just as simple as going on the police department's website, finding the formal complaint button that goes straight to the police department's internal investigations. I don't know, we email, and it goes straight to and then also most of them are governed directly by the chief. The chief hear about it. That's a different thing than calling for the sergeant on a traffic stop and saying, hey, your officer did this. That's way more of an informal way of taking care of it. And if it's bad enough, the sergeant will end up, or the major or corporal, whoever it is for whatever department you got, but they'll end up, responding to it and making it an informal investigation. But 9 times out of 10, the officer is going to end up, if you do a formal complaint, you'll get answers. You'll get the answer. They may just call and say, hey, look, what they did was actually appropriate. They did not violate your constitutional rights. I've looked at the video and this is what I observed happen. And you kind of can break it down with them. And some good departments, some chiefs will actually let you come in and watch the video with the IA people if you really are concerned. So, I mean, just keep that in mind. Those are some tools in your belt. When the traffic stop, when the officer gives you information, a lot of people, most officers will leave first. Some citizens leave first and go the opposite way of other citizens. Some citizens, depending on how long the officer takes, they'll leave. But just leaving is fine. Just leave, get out of there. Make sure you put your paperwork you need and just kind of separate and go your own way. Contact your legal counsel for advice, or if you have it, and hopefully you get some good advice on how to handle your situation moving forward. But the goal, when we go breaking that all the way down, is these are the things that I go through that I think about in order to try to survive a traffic stop. Ultimately, I want other people to feel safe too. I want other people to feel like they can survive a traffic stop. I want people to feel like they can interact with the police, handle this simple paperwork transaction, argue it in a court of law, and then let it be what it's going to be. Just know that something as simple as like doing a canine sniff, does not happen as often in communities where minorities are heavily involved in local politics. Being straight up with you, when you see communities that are when they are heavily involved, because the concern is that like you don't just want to target everybody with these canine sniffs, or you want to make sure that you target everybody fairly or equitably. So like, in some states now, they are required to document demographic information, the charge, date and time, all like pretty much anything that goes on the summons. They're required to document that regardless of whether they gave them a summons or not for a traffic stop or a Terry stop, which means the officer just made contact with someone to detain them in that moment, wherever they are on the street, in person, without the vehicle. And they're required to do that because they're now gauging the demographics of how often they stop somebody who is in a particular demographic, age, race, ethnicity, gender or sex. And so therefore people are going to get the idea of what police officers are doing more now. And so that kind of accountability makes a difference. So I cannot push enough local involvement and being willing to like talk to your city council members and your county superintendents or your township people about what your deputies are doing, and what your police officers are doing. And, and also, if you do have a concealed weapon in your car, I leave it up to you, but I've seen people feel comfortable telling the police officer straight up, like, hey, I do have a concealed weapon permit and I do have a weapon in the car. Some police officers will ask for the weapon, leave the weapon they'll disarm it and leave it on the trunk of the car during the course of the traffic stop, especially if it's in like a rough neighborhood or if it's like late at night and the police officers by themselves and they're just being really, really safe during the course of the traffic stop. I think that's the preferred way of going about it. Sometimes them getting that information up front makes them feel like you're being honest with them and that you're helping them do their job in a safe way. But some people don't feel comfortable with that because they're afraid their officer is going to get in that, start glitching and getting in that, or lagging and start, getting in that OODA looping, start getting nervous about it. And if that does happen, then I would be, hey, you have a supervisor route? Can I call a non-emergency number and get somebody else to come over here because I'm really concerned that this situation is getting out of control. But yeah, just make sure you know your gun laws, your weapons laws. If an officer has to ask you for permission to search your car, it's probably because they don't have the probable cause to search your car. And just keep in mind that, sometimes people build their own cases against themselves. So look, I just advise you to, the goal here, my goal typically, and again, these are all things that I take about and I take into account when I do traffic stops. Do what works for you, do what you think works best for you, but just keep in mind that like, you don't have to say anything. And as far as related to the traffic violation, but be courteous, give them the information, they ask you for your name, basic stuff like that. But just don't, but if you choose not to talk about that traffic accident or that, that item that they may have found in your car, or that's up to you. That's up to you. But the goal is to make it back home to your family. The goal is for your family to be safe. And, just a personal story. I remember I was on a roadway. I got put over in the same day. I was driving down the road to going somewhere, and then I was coming back from that place, and I got put over both times for the same reason, about the same person who acted like they didn't recognize me either time. Fortunately, I did actually make a complaint, but it was more of an informal complaint I didn't even flash a badge or anything like that, because I actually want to see how officers handle themselves during the course of the traffic stop, because I know what's supposed to happen. So I kind of like seeing how they do it, seeing how they respond, see how they treat me before they realize that, oh, he's a police officer, he's one of us, and blah, blah, blah. And, because I feel like I get a real honest gauge about like where we are and what people are doing. So yes, I will leave that there. If you guys have any questions or anything I might have forgotten to cover or anything that might have been unclear, if I was talking too fast or whatever, just let me know. And I'll be more than happy to go back over another podcast. But my goal is just to try to give everybody some tidbits about what I would do or what I do to cover myself during the course of a traffic stop, to try to be safe, man, because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to make it back home to our families and our friends and be safe out here. So anyway, I am C-Dub. Thank y'all for joining me.